Welcome back to the Done Deal Show, joined as ever by Wednesday by the brilliant Ben Jacobs. How are you, buddy?
Very well. How are you?
Can't complain. Football's back. United are about to sign one of the best midfielders in the world. We might even be having a new owner soon. Who knows? Who knows? But no, all good. All good on a personal front. Lots to delve into with yourself today, as we know, for the next hour. Viewers, we're talking De Jong. We're talking Rabiot. We're going to be taking a look at other ins and outs at Chelsea, including Fofana as well, taking a look at Liverpool, PSG, and much, much more. So make sure the like button has been smashed. Make sure that you are sharing this across your social media platforms as well, and you subscribe and turn on that bell notification button. But I wanted to start off, if possible, Dean, with Man United. I mean, it's been a crazy week since we last spoke. Battered by Brighton in many ways. I know we're going to get onto De Jong later and where he may or may not end up in relation to Man United. Arnautovic was coming. That's now off. But Rabiot looks real. What's the latest as far as you're aware regarding the deal with Juve and, of course, getting the permission slip from his mummy to join Manchester United?
Yeah, his mum is his agent. That is 100% correct. And what we're seeing is Manchester United moving pretty fast on this deal. So there's absolutely no problem in terms of a club-to-club agreement. That's the first thing to say. And the reason for that is simply because from the perspective of Juventus, they're quite happy to agree a deal and let the player go. So then it's all about personal terms. The wages are one of the most eye-watering aspects of this particular deal. But the France international heading into the final 12 months of his contract, and Erik ten Hag naturally needs to strengthen. So it's really all about the player negotiations to make sure that, first of all, he's happy with the move to Manchester United, and second of all, the financials of the deal are acceptable to him. And from what I understand, there's no problem regarding a move specifically to Manchester United. Rabiot is quite prepared to play under Ten Hag and at Manchester United and have Europa League football over Champions League football. So it's all just going to come down to the number. And Manchester United have made progress both late last night and, as I understand it, this morning, UK time as well. So this deal is heading in the right direction at the moment. And I think that it would be a very smart signing for Manchester United as well. He's been at Juventus, Rabiot, since 2019. He's played over 125 times. And I think off the back of what was such a disappointing Brighton defeat, fresh blood, a new name, and somebody that I think could add something to Manchester United and get them back to winning ways. The whole transfer makes far more sense than, say, Arnautovic and one or two of the other names that have been linked with Manchester United. This one, I think, might turn into a winner.
It's interesting to hear your take on that in terms of a smart piece of business. A lot of Man United fans, including myself, do feel a little bit underwhelmed, as if, is Rabiot, is he, in your opinion, an improvement on what we already have, the likes of McTominay, the likes of Fred? Do you feel that he will enhance our ability to win games?
Well, I think the point with Rabiot is that he's low risk financially as far as the fee is concerned, slightly higher risk with the wages because they are eye-watering. And then, of course, there has to be a fit in the dressing room as well. And I suppose Manchester United fans might speak of, we've just got rid of one slightly troublesome Frenchman in the form of Paul Pogba. And now here comes Rabiot, who can be a little bit hit and miss at football clubs in terms of how he acts on the field and off it. So I think that Manchester United fans may be concerned because they're thinking about Rabiot's past, and he can be nonchalant in games at times. He can turn up with an element of sort of lethargy, and that can flatter to deceive. And then there's been a variety of off-field rows and indiscretions as well. So when you add all of that up, you might naturally say bad egg, and the last thing that Manchester United needs is a bad egg. But if you look at the speed that Ten Hag wants to play and the energy that he hopes to bring, then Rabiot has to fit into that system. So if the manager is confident that he can get more energy out of the player on the field and the move will be a fit in his dressing room, then you're really only looking at the fee first and foremost, because at Rabiot's point in his career, he's not going to come in like, say, a Ronaldo and divide a dressing room and dominate in terms of how vocal he is on and off the field. He's clearly being signed as a depth player and somebody that at the price Juventus are quoting, I think actually adds a fair amount of value. So you have to kind of judge the signing for me in the context within which it's being made. I would not call him box office. I would not call him revolutionary, but I would say that it is a smart cog in a new era under Ten Hag that can help Manchester United get back to winning ways in the same way that Christian Eriksen is. Obviously, very different characters, but the same type of signing. Low risk financially as far as a fee, and Eriksen was a free is concerned, and potentially high return. So I understand why Manchester United fans are not excited about it, because you want, if you're a Manchester United fan, a De Jong or a Milinkovic-Savic. You want Ronaldo to stay. And a lot of Manchester United fans before the move next year to Leipzig would have liked Benjamin Sesko, because each of those names screams ambition, screams instant return. But they all come in their own way with big prices. Rabiot doesn't, but his wages are high, just to reiterate. So I think that this is not going to be box office, but I do genuinely believe that in many ways his arrival makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's a fair take. And you know, so a few Spurs fans have kind of said to me in the last 24 hours, Terry, everybody said that Bentancur and Kulusevski were, you know, Juve rejects. They were going to flop. They weren't going to make it in the Prem. And he said they've been brilliant, especially Kulusevski. So there is a hope that this deal goes in exactly the same direction as that. You know, there were people, and I'm not suggesting he'll be as impactful, but I remember people laughing at Liverpool when they spent 27 million pounds on the Chelsea flop in Mo Salah, and he's turned out to, you know, be tracking towards GOAT conversation. So there is another way to look at this, but I do get why, you know, I know I am frustrated about it, and I get why other Man United fans are as well. Before we move into the De Jong situation, which involves United and Chelsea, Gakpo is a name that's been mentioned as well in the last 24 hours. 35 million pounds, supposedly the asking price, a big Arsenal target throughout the majority of the summer. Is that a deal that you've heard anything about, and maybe Man United may move towards?
Yeah, and this one I think would be really exciting. By the way, the strange thing about Manchester United as well, not that it's a rule per se, but often that box office signing that arrives with an overwhelmingly strong reputation and a high fee doesn't succeed. Pogba, second return, just one example. And sometimes the underwhelming ones with lower fees actually do prove to succeed. So judge the player not based on the reputation, but have some faith in the manager, is what we all do as football fans. And once they've arrived, if there's a starting point of they're going to fail, it's not going to work, then that's not the healthiest approach as either a football fan, or if that's your perspective writing about a signing as a journalist. You have to wait and see. Otherwise, there's a fair chance you're going to get proven wrong. And when a player's free or under in this market 25 million or so, and Eriksen, Rabiot fall into that category, there's very little to lose as far as the financials are concerned. So let's see with that one. With Gakpo, I think that it could well depend on what happens with De Jong, but I know that Erik ten Hag is very keen. He's rated around 35 million. He had a tremendous year last campaign, 21 goals in 47 games. And again, Manchester United need to boost the attack. And naturally, they are going to have to prioritize. And I've said this many times, by the way, the reason why De Jong versus Gakpo might be a factor is because Manchester United might have to make the maths work. And once again, given what they've already bought, they can stretch to, let's say, an Arnautovic, even though they've, in my opinion, rightly completely given up that interest now. But he was cheap. But if you're adding up the 85 million euros for De Jong and then 35 million for Gakpo, and you still potentially need more, that's where I think Manchester United might be challenged to cumulatively make all of these signings work within their financial budget, which is not a 250 million or more that, say, Chelsea are dealing with. But Manchester United are really keen, particularly Erik ten Hag. This is a him signing, from what I understand, rather than anything particularly with spillover from the old regime. And of course, Ten Hag shares the same agency as Gakpo as well. So that's going to get a lot of people talking about their relationship and the ease of making deal happen. And the main thing for United is obviously that with Anthony Martial injured and nobody yet knows whether a late bid is going to come in for Ronaldo, that will change Manchester United's not for sale stance. So they have to strengthen. They've missed out on Sesko. As I've already said, he's joining Leipzig next summer, and Arnautovic is off the table. So attentions have to turn towards bringing goals, and Gakpo makes a whole lot of sense, but it's simply whether they can move on Gakpo now and still push for De Jong. And I think what will be interesting is that, as per my sources, I've reported this, I've got a lot of stick from Manchester United fans on social media, but I still understand that United have all but given up. Now, remember, I said all but. They've not told the player's agent or Barcelona they have given up, but as soon as Chelsea became more advanced in their confidence, Manchester United, as I understand it, know that he is more likely, if he's forced out of the club, to pick Chelsea over Manchester United. So if they push hard for Gakpo, then they may not need to worry about finding 85 million for De Jong, because that deal from Manchester United's perspective is looking less likely at the moment. And still, for any of the suitors, tough, because De Jong keeps saying repeatedly, and I'm sure we'll come on to this a bit later, that he wants to stay at Barcelona. So in the next 48 hours, we'll get clarity on that one. But there's certainly a lot of substance to Manchester United's interest and advancement in Cody Gakpo.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly one with the kind of Rabiot and especially Arnautovic. I'm glad we've walked away for a number of reasons. There comes a lot of controversy over some of the xenophobic, racist things that he has done, the gestures that he has made. There's also when peak Jose Mourinho says he struggles to manage a player, you know they're not a good egg. They're not a good person to have in that dressing room, especially if they become unhappy, as an example. So I'm glad we've walked away from that deal. But Gakpo strikes me as something very different. Gakpo is, 23 years of age, skillful, on the way up. It's a very difficult one for a certain group of Arsenal fans to laugh at, because they were the ones running the comps, sharing the links, talking about how great he's been all year. It's kind of nice to go for a player like him. And when you think he may be available at a third of the price that Ajax want for Anthony, there's no way Anthony is 3 times the player of him, as an example. So it does represent that good value for money. And United have got money. I mean, well, Richard Arnold has promised us money. He said 200 million we could spend. I'm not suggesting we have that much, but they've said it out loud. They got caught on camera saying it. So you better go out there if we don't get De Jong and land some additional targets for Man United, because we certainly looked the other day as if we needed it. And you kind of mentioned De Jong there and said in the next sort of 48 hours, his kind of future will be sort of decided. What's the latest surrounding Chelsea? I believe that Chelsea are according to a tweet of yours I read earlier, they're confident that they can agree a fee with Barca. But of course, it all comes down to what happens with these deferred wages, the new deal Barca wanting to sign, and the ramifications of him not doing it, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we move on to De Jong, the thing I like about Gakpo, having seen him play a fair amount, is just the flexibility. He can go onto the left wing. He can cut inside. He's very tall as well, in my opinion, for a traditional wide player. And it allows him to move into a lot of different spaces that would benefit Manchester United, especially if you consider that Manchester United are really struggling at the moment in that number 9 position. So I will be really intrigued to see whether Ten Hag has any aspirations to kind of convert him into that more central number 9 figure, or keep him out on the wide left. But he's just always involved. That's what I love about it. Great stamina, decent movement off the ball, tall, as I say, for a wide player, contributes to goals, scores goals. He's just top of a lot of the stats that you would want if you're Manchester United. And I think I'm right in saying in my praise of him that in the league last season, he was either getting a goal or an assist pretty much every 75 minutes, which is absolutely astonishing, because what that tells you is that he averages an impact, a tangible impact, not a good game, not a decent delivery, not a move that was, not fantasy points that almost came about and then didn't materialize. He's actually giving you something. every 75 minutes in the league. Now, it might be quite difficult to translate those numbers into Premier League, but that is very reassuring for Manchester United. And that's why at the moment they are preparing a bid. And let's see whether they move on that. And it will be about 35 million. But I think that would be a very, very good signing and somebody that fits right into Ten Hag's wheelhouse, because he understands the Ten Hag style. He knows the manager already, and he will adapt, in my opinion, quite quickly to the speed of the Premier League. And then with De Jong, it's usual mess, to be perfectly honest with you. It's Barcelona having all the control. And how many times, Terry, have I come on this show and said De Jong will be decided by Barcelona, not by Manchester United, not by Chelsea, probably not even by the player. All the control is with Barcelona. And the reason for that is because of all of the different permutations and possibilities. So if they can get him to take the wage cut, then job done from Barcelona's perspective. If they have an agreement with Manchester City, which is not a given, by the way, but Silva would quite like to join Barcelona, then they will need the wage space and the transfer fee. And until the point comes where Barcelona drive De Jong out of the football club, there will be no full clarity unless De Jong just gets so frustrated that he says, okay, I now want to leave. I now don't consider myself a Barcelona player. So constantly, it is important to reiterate the context. And often I get hammered for, oh, why are you doing a thread? Why are you giving the context? But with this one deal, I beg you, listen to the full context. Because if you take a line out of the context, then you are steering this particular complicated deal in the wrong direction. And the context, once again, is this. Manchester United were first to agree an 85 million euros deal, 65 million guaranteed plus add-ons. And De Jong did not want the move. Then Manchester United since have been working hard at the agent's end. And as far as the financials are concerned, what Manchester United and what Chelsea are offering are relatively similar. They'll both pay a high wage. They'll both pay the deferred wages. But De Jong has basically said, okay, thanks. That's the financials. Of course, they're better than I'm on at Barcelona. Of course, I'll get the money owed to me. But that's not the swaying factor. He wants to stay at Barcelona. And so many players better than I'm prepared to stay at Barcelona on less preferable terms. I mean, there's talk that Gerard Piqué will even play for free. But in De Jong's case, he doesn't want to take the pay cut. Then Chelsea come along later in the deal and they say, okay, we've learnt from Manchester United. We are not going to be messed around here. So we know the number and we can get to that number with Barcelona, and it will be ever so slightly less than Manchester United's 85 million euros. But we're not going to place a formal bid or take this any further now after talks with the club until the player tells us if he wants to join. So then we come back again to the player. And De Jong says, I want to stay and I don't want to pay cut, and something has to give. And what's giving at the moment is that Barcelona are effectively taking steps to drive De Jong out of the football club, either because of the pay cut or because they want Silva. And people will look at the alleged criminality of his renewal, along with some other players like ter Stegen, and say that Barcelona are just trying to keep him in a way where they force him to pay back some money and be on less preferable terms. But that's not my understanding. The threat of legal action is, again, all about sending a message to De Jong saying, if you stay on these terms, then we're going to make life very, very uncomfortable for you. And it's a tactic, because De Jong faces the decision right now where it's either reduced wages at Barcelona by his own choice, or it's staying at Barcelona and having a protracted legal case that may be a bluff, but could be activated. Or he's got to breathe, be integral, go somewhere else, get your money, get your deferred wages, move on. And the fact that this evidence of criminality has come out is, again, all Barcelona saying one thing in public, we'd love for you to stay, and then in private doing another thing. When I met Laporta 10 days or so ago, he said, we respect the contract. I said, what happens if De Jong just says, I want to carry on? And he said, we respect the contract. And at the same time, they're challenging legally, potentially, the contract. And that is all about PR and sending a message to De Jong again of, you've got two choices here. We either make life difficult for you if you stay or you go. And that is why Chelsea think the door is open. So officially, the situation is that De Jong doesn't want to leave, but because he is being to some extent driven out, the next 48 hours are key. And that's where it may become a straight choice between Manchester United and Chelsea. And that's what my understanding is. He would prefer Chelsea to Manchester United. And a lot of people say, but what about the Ten Hag relationship? My understanding is it's nothing special. It's nothing bad, but it's nothing special. Whereas Chelsea are offering pretty much the same package and Champions League football and London. And my understanding still remains that Chelsea would be the player's preference if he is forced out. But again, context, because that line will be quoted and taken as a standalone because, hey, Ben Jacobs talks forever and does threads that last forever. But again, in this transfer, it is so important. That is De Jong's preference if he is forced out the club. But he does genuinely want to stay at Barcelona, which is why the next few hours are so key.
Yeah, do you know, it's really interesting because it's good to now hear the clarity coming out. But, you know, we've been seeking it as fans for a while in this kind of what if. The biggest question I've had all summer is what happens if De Jong says no? What happens if he says, well, I'm just staying? And I think we're now starting to see they will make life for Frenkie very uncomfortable, which we all expected. There's still talk of, well, they might be able to register their players, but financially they still need to move him on. And I still have just a gut feeling. That's all it is that he will end up sort of submitting to, as you say, Barca will win this, in my opinion, and he will leave. And as I said all summer, I think United had a great chance. But if a team like Chelsea gets involved, I think there's little to no chance. I completely agree with you. But context, as you put, is so key. And I enjoy your threads, by the way. They're informative. But the reason people don't like them is they want that one little line of Chelsea feel like they can agree a fee. For some Chelsea fans, that's all they want to read because that means we might get him. If you read the rest of the thread, it's like, but he wants to stay. I think for a lot of Chelsea fans, they're starting to see, well, you are to a degree in the same space as Man United, which is, yeah, he'll agree to your personal terms. He's happy to come, but only if he can't stay at Barca. Nothing's really changed in relation to that. There's a comment here that says from YUFC, long time no see, YUFC. It's good to have you back. It says, what if this is a big if Man United offer Frenkie de Jong Alexis Sanchez style wages? They make him the richest and most paid player in the entire league. Could that sway him to Man United, do you think?
Well, I don't think this is about money for Frenkie de Jong, which is ironic because it's also all about money from Barcelona's point of view. But if he wanted a lucrative offer for the sake of the money, not the football decision, then he would have left Barcelona a long time ago. But there's a sentiment somehow still towards what he calls his dream club. And I don't think Manchester United can do much more in terms of the financial terms offered. They're already saying it's huge wages and we're going to pay your deferred wages. And I think that in itself is the best offer that they can and will give. And Chelsea will be offering, broadly speaking, very similar personal terms as well. So De Jong knows that if he moves, he's going to get exceptional wages and deferred wages. It's all about his desire to stay. And I think the other thing, which to me is really interesting, I'm in no way saying that this will happen, but it's a possibility, is what if Barca U-turned in order to keep De Jong after they activate their fourth lever? Because if I was De Jong and I was to consider a pay cut, which he doesn't want to do at the moment, I would be saying to Barcelona, I will only take a pay cut as of now if you also give me all of my deferred wages up front. In other words, if Barcelona activate a lever, that gives them a bit more flexibility and in their mind create space to bid sensibly for Bernardo Silva, because at the moment, I don't think Manchester City believe that the valuation is anywhere close. Then as FDJ, I would say, cool, you know what? I will take a pay cut then and I'll U-turn much like Dembele did, but only on one condition, that I also get 17 million quid on top up front in what's owed to me before I take the pay cut. And I'm not saying that that will happen or that any sources have intimated that De Jong is going to ask for that before the window closes, but just keep an eye on that possibility, because right now this whole thing is being billed as De Jong doesn't want to take a pay cut, so he's either going to force his hand at Barcelona or he's going to leave for Chelsea or Manchester United. But what about a scenario where he gets 17 million quid up front and then is prepared to talk about a pay cut. And if I was an employee and my employer said, take a pay cut, and they owed me money, that's the first thing logically I would say. If I was prepared to entertain a pay cut, I would say, great, but before we discuss that pay cut, let's talk about the money that you owe me first. So watch that narrative if Barcelona do push to keep De Jong. But at the moment, I think that in a very complicated saga, at the time of recording, a move away somewhere is still more likely than Barca finding a resolution here to keep him. But a lot can change because this is the madness of the transfer window. And this particular saga, like Jules Koundé, like Rafinha, it's always Barcelona. Those are three, and one of them is still ongoing, of the most complicated, unpredictable deals that you will get in any window, period, let alone just this summer.
I could not agree with you more. It is strange, as you say. And when we saw the report from Ornstein of the legal action because of the criminality of the previous board, you also that for me was one of the biggest kind of wows in this deal. Another super chat from YUFC just says, so you're telling me that there isn't nothing Man United can do? We can't offer Barca 150 million guarantee. And listen, I think you're now going in. If Man United offered 150 million pounds to Barca, but please reject Chelsea, and we offered De Jong double the wages of Chelsea, of course, then, but that isn't going to happen, my friend. So that Ben's, I'm sorry to speak for you here, Ben. Ben's talking in reality, not what if they did something crazy? You know, what if they kidnapped De Jong, held him hostage, created Stockholm syndrome, and then he never wanted to leave? Like that, nothing like that's going to happen. So yeah, that might work, but it ain't happening. So it's irrelevant for Ben to bring that up, in my opinion.
Also, though, I mean, in answer to the question, I would say Manchester United not just sitting there; they've been frustrated at times, and they have had to be patient, particularly actually in the process where they were agreeing a fee. But it's poor negotiating if they go back to Barcelona and say, we want to pay more to try and price Chelsea out of the market. And I think Chelsea would probably come back within reason. And then they're pushing on the player side. So they have, as I understand it, all but given up of success. But that doesn't mean that you ever burn a bridge. They've been constantly on to the agent and player side to establish what the situation is. But if every time you check in, you are told he wants to stay at Barcelona from the agent or the player side, then to some extent, all you can do is wait and ask to be first to be told if anything changes. If you learn of a development, if you're directly told of a development, you come back. So when I say all but given up, the reason why I didn't say have given up is because the difference is that Manchester United will revisit a situation if at any point they are either told that Chelsea do not stand a chance of success, or that the player has changed his mind, and due to the bad blood, due to the threat of legal action, due to the pressure on him to take a wage cut, he is now changed his opinion of Barcelona Football Club. It's no longer his dream club in practice because he's being made to feel unwelcome. And as the window gets close to closing, Manchester United are keeping contact for that very reason, that they could try their luck. But if it becomes a straight race between Chelsea and Manchester United on similar terms, which is currently where we're heading towards, and De Jong decides that he is going to leave, which is still not a given because he's been consistent in his stance, at that point, Chelsea have the advantage over Manchester United based upon my understanding. And my understanding, without, as a journalist will never do, giving away sources, is framed not around specifically one club or the other. I think everyone says to me on Twitter, but you're somehow a Chelsea fan or you're Chelsea biased. Remember, I've followed Barcelona in America, and I've spoken to Laporta on and off record. I've spoken to other Barcelona sources. I've spoken to people close to De Jong. And this is where you get the threads that you either love or you hate, like Marmite. This is where you get the longer answers because it is in that context. And I've said throughout the window on this show that during the transfer window, everyone might want black and white, but it's fluid. And unless you go to Man United, Chelsea, the player, and Barcelona to frame where we're at, and if in doing that, you get a bit more of a fence-sitting perspective, that is actually context. And you might get hammered for it. But if I come out now and say it's definite this or it's definite that, that is simply not where we're at, because I've said many, many times that even De Jong has not 100% decided. And if De Jong has not 100% decided, then how is it responsible journalism for a journalist to tell you a 100%? So I can give you where I, based on sources, believe it to be heading, which is Chelsea over Manchester United. But I have to preface that with De Jong says he wants to stay at Barcelona, because that is what people close to the players' camp are briefing. And I have to contextualize it based on what Laporta said to us at CBS on record, which is he'd like De Jong to stay. And that is why Chelsea are optimistic rather than definite they're going to get the player. But Chelsea, at the time of recording, are far, far more optimistic than Manchester United currently are, for the reasons that I've given and reported.
And that makes a lot of sense. Staying with Chelsea, Wesley Fofana, a big week still in relation to trying to close that deal out. What's currently going on, and what can Chelsea fans expect to see progress there?
Fofana is an interesting one because Chelsea need more advanced verbal discussions, and verbal is really important in a transfer window, because as soon as someone engages in significant verbal conversations, especially if they become face to face, then you start as the buyer to think that a deal is possible. And when a club says not for sale to begin with, your first win is actually in getting those significant verbal talks, because at that point you start to believe that the resolve of that not for sale stance will be tested. So Chelsea have had 2 bids rejected, and they've had to go in a bit blind, and Leicester have been very dismissive. And then the third bid, and I'm calling it a third bid, but by the way, in the window, if a bid's rejected, it can be denied. So who knows, further down the line, we might hear it's a second bid. We might even hear that it's a fourth bid, and a third one we didn't know about has already been rejected. And this is also the negotiation tactic as well, because the buying club doesn't want to keep putting out there what the fee is. Otherwise, they look like they're going up in 5 or 10 million increments every day. And that gives the selling club all of the authority. And the selling club don't want to say we've rejected multiple bids, because it makes it sound like they're prepared to sell. Otherwise, they just ignore bids. And then that plays into their not for sale stance. So once you get past 2 bids, it becomes very murky. But from Chelsea's perspective, my understanding is that they will bid a third time, and it won't be a world record bid. They're still hoping for Fofana under 80 million. It's not as advanced club to club as De Jong, but they remain very confident because there's player buy-in. They know Fofana wants the move. There's plenty of time left in the window. And there's almost an obsession at Chelsea's end about getting Fofana now. So they plan to keep going within a reasonable fee and structure. And the number is also going to be important, but so is the structure. Because if, as I've said before, you get to, let's say, 85 million, it won't be that high, as I understand it, within the next bid. But if you get to 85 million and you're Chelsea, because you've got so many add-on potentials comparative to smaller clubs, because you can say, well, okay, we'll get to 85 million, but 5 million will be if we win the Champions League, and 5 million will be if we win the Premier League, and 5 million will be if he makes 100 appearances or more for Chelsea in the Premier League, versus, let's say, 75 million, where you say 70 million hypothetically is upfront or in 2 payments, and the 5 million is 25 Premier League games for Chelsea. And then Leicester have got a decision to make, because the lower amount is a way more likely and better structure, and the higher amount might be in 4 installments, and the add-ons may be less likely. So look at the number with Fofana, but look at the structure as well. It's not just a straight race to 80 or 85 million, which is why Chelsea, as I understand it, will return a bit lower and try and have a more preferable structure. And we'll see from here how Leicester react. But at the moment, Leicester are maintaining still not for sale, or at least reluctant to sell, and they plan to play him against Arsenal. And the next few days will determine if Bowley and Chelsea can get more advanced to the point where there's a genuine and serious back and forth. And if there is in the next few days, then you might find that Fofana isn't involved against Arsenal. But the situation as of now is Leicester are fully expecting Fofana to start against Arsenal. They're fully expecting to play him. They still really don't want to sell. So this is a club to club anyway, more challenging negotiation comparative to agreeing a De Jong fee with Barcelona. It's almost the opposite. Like De Jong is all about convincing the player, and Fofana is all about convincing Leicester. And that's why it's a big week ahead in both deals.
It certainly sounds like it. Another deal that another two deals that have been spoken about a lot by Chelsea. They've got a lot going on. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and the name of Wilfried kind of Zaha have come up. What's your understanding of these two?
I think that Chelsea are actually pushing on Aubameyang, and they're very intent to make an offer of some sorts. And then Aubameyang is a sort of intriguing one, because I think Barcelona would be perfectly happy to let him go. Yet he was given a squad number. He looked pretty happy in all the videos that we've seen from the last 24 hours. Not that you can read too much into that, but if anything's imminent at that point, Barcelona are not putting that out, which tells you that Chelsea have actually ramped up their interest, as I understand it, in the last 24 hours to get from inquiring to actually seriously tabling a bid. And this is all being driven by Thomas Tuchel, because he thinks that there's that band-aid ability to get some goals and some versatility and some depth in attack. But he's not obviously a long-term solution as far as Chelsea are concerned. So Chelsea are moving on Aubameyang. It's not unthinkable that they get De Jong and Aubameyang. And I don't know why in the last week or so reports were put out there that sort of said it will only be Depay or Aubameyang, because it actually seems like Barcelona are quite happy to entertain a possibility where both end up elsewhere in some capacity. So I think watch the Aubameyang one quite closely, because I do think that Chelsea are moving on that. I think with Zaha, it's something that might make a lot of sense in terms of a player that would fit into Thomas Tuchel's tactics. And again, Zaha would be open to that move. But my understanding is that that deal is, again, not as advanced as the Aubameyang one, which is normal because Chelsea have ramped up Aubameyang. So they were probably like for like a few days ago in terms of two players that were being monitored and discussed and at reasonable financials. But because Chelsea are pushing so hard on De Jong to try and work out if anything can be done this week, it's normal at the same time that Aubameyang would be discussed too. And they want to leave Barcelona with something, Chelsea, for sure. So if Chelsea fail to get De Jong and Aubameyang, then they will be extremely disappointed, and therefore in the talks for one, the others being discussed and vice versa, which is why I think that Aubameyang is ramping up and Zaha is sort of tempering off. And there's no logical reason why you would end up with Aubameyang and Zaha. So I think it will be one or the other. But with Werner going and with Ziyech's future unclear, of course they are going to need to strengthen. So it's not unthinkable that two attackers would come in, but it would feel a bit short-termist. It's only my personal opinion if the two that came in were Zaha and Aubameyang, due to their age and the longevity that they would have at the football club. So I still suspect that Chelsea in that area of attack, even though Broja's there too, because of the Werner situation having gone, because of the Ziyech situation, would still like to leave. It wouldn't remotely surprise me if they want two options, and even if they have to buy one expensive, one economical, or two economical, or one old. But I think the only scenario you won't get is two old and two economical in attack. I think that they would desperately, even with Broja there, want an Aubameyang plus young, or a Zaha plus younger. And that's why I think that it will be, only my personal opinion, Aubameyang or Zaha. And at the time of recording, I think that Aubameyang is more likely than Zaha.
That's fair. And you mentioned Broja there. I mean, that's a player that, it felt like there was a very advanced approach from West Ham. Of course, they ended up with Scamacca. He looks like he's going to be given that game time this year. It sounds like he's going to. And he looked like a real star in the making at Southampton. And he could be a player that ends up saving Chelsea 50, 60, 70, 80 million pounds.
Sometimes when you send a player out and they do well, they develop a kind of cult reputation. And Broja, by the way, showed more flashes of potential than Havertz for me in the first game of the season, but it's just not a reflective or particularly fair gauge of judging a starting player in a difficult game for Chelsea versus a substitute coming on with fresh legs. But absolutely, if you judge Broja by particularly the first half of the season at Southampton last season, he was superb. He tapered off a little bit, But he also had tremendous service. That's the other thing to bear in mind, that he was playing in a 4-4-2 on the left side, and you've got Kyle Walker-Peters, El Yunusi, and then James Ward-Prowse and Romeo in central midfield. So there's balance to that formation, and he thrived, especially, as I say, in the first half of the season. He ended up with 8 goals in all competitions and 6 in the Premier League. So, of course, there's a logic that Chelsea should give him more of a squad opportunity, but I think Tuchel just wants proven goals. Now, those goals might come from a player in a wide position, a versatile position, a false number 9, a number 10. It doesn't have to be a like-for-like Broja position. But I do think that if you rely on Broja, it's a risk now compared to a year's time. I think if you rely on Broja to come off the bench, you rely on Broja in games you're leading 2-0. If you rely on Broja at 1-0 to come on and kill off the game, if you rely on Broja against, with respect, lesser opposition in the Premier League or the Cup, at that point, great, go for it, develop him, integrate him, because he has got huge potential. But I think that if you look at Broja having to start a game because someone else is injured or out of form and there's not the depth there in the Champions League group stage, that's where you start to say it's too soon for him, and that you cannot guarantee that he is the solution goals-wise. Whereas, to be honest with you, even at his age, if you throw Aubameyang into a Champions League group stage, for me, you can breathe easy as Chelsea that him, coupled with the depth and the rest of the team working around him, is going to contribute. And that's why I think that a signing like an Aubameyang is a lot of sense for Chelsea, because Thomas Tuchel can trust him from the word go. Whereas what you're doing with Broja is you're trusting in the potential, not the finished product.
Yeah. And that makes a hell of a lot of sense. It really, really does. Viewers, I know you're enjoying the show so far, but make sure you're smashing that like button in appreciation for what you're hearing and of support of the Football Terrace. Get that done now. Currently over 500. Let's get this past the 1,000 mark. That would be amazing. Sticking with the Premier League, we have a few questions we want to go to, because I know we've got about just under 15 minutes left on the show. I wanted to ask you about Tottenham in their pursuit of Nicola. I want to pronounce his name right. Is it Zena? You pronounce it Zaniolo?
No, I want to hear you now. I want to hear you have a go at it.
I had it in my head ready. Is it Zaniolo?
Zaniolo.
Zaniolo. Wow. Yeah. That sounds much better than my interpretation of his name. But what's the latest with Tottenham trying to sign him? Zaniolo. Okay, I got it now. There we go.
Fun fact, Zaniolo actually a player that I lived next door to for 6 months when he was injured at Roma, and I was out in Rome. Really good guy, very versatile. Has actually been a bit inconsistent at Roma based on last season. Had a horrible injury that I just referenced, but I think that he would be perfectly suited to the Premier League. And there's also the ability to potentially use him in a variety of positions. And I think that Conte might end up converting him so he can play basically anywhere in terms of a wide position. And I think that's the appeal. And even though if you look at his history, he hasn't played in all of the positions that I'm going to mention, he could potentially be an inverted fullback, a straight fullback, a winger, a forward, anything. And that's the potential. And as I say, he's got his favoured position, he's got his normal position, but that's the potential. And Spurs, when they played Roma in a friendly, spoke about a deal. The price would be, I think, somewhere in the region of 50 million euros. But Mourinho's kind of roadblocking the deal at the moment, and Spurs are focusing on outgoings. So that's the situation at the moment. Definitely a player to keep an eye on between now and when the window ends, but preface with the fact that Mourinho's kind of put his foot down at the moment and said no. And when Mourinho says he doesn't want to sell a player, he has a lot more authority than most managers. And I think that if Spurs had lined this up a bit earlier, it would have been really intriguing, because Mourinho was a bit frustrated with Zaniolo simply because that lack of consistency. But he knows what he's got in terms of the age and the talent. And that's what's really made it difficult for Spurs to move in any meaningful way, coupled with the fact that they genuinely want to sort the outgoings out first. So I do think that Tottenham will move before the window shuts for a player, loosely speaking, of Zaniolo's current abilities. And whether it's him or another creative-minded player or another versatile player that can kind of be that assister from deeper or further forwards. As I say, Zaniolo can be converted into all of these possibilities. Whether it's him may all come down to Mourinho. I think at a club-to-club level, Tottenham can agree a fee, and I think it will be around 50 million euros, maybe even 5 million more or so. But Mourinho at the moment isn't exactly saying get rid of him. In January, I think he probably was. But right now, I don't sense from people that I speak to close to the player and at Roma as well, and I know Roma very, very well, I don't think that they are 100% sold on sanctioning this. And that is why it's problematic from Tottenham's perspective at the moment. But a lot will change in the next 3 weeks. So if I was a Spurs fan, I would be saying watch it, but don't get overly excited about it just yet until it gets to the point where Jose Mourinho is at peace with letting him go.
Comment here says, is there anything concrete about Tonali to Arsenal? There's also another Arsenal question asking about the Pino bid being accepted. So 2 Arsenal questions there, but Tonali to Arsenal, can you see that being something that develops this summer?
I think Arsenal have just made an inquiry about this. I'm not aware that anything as advanced as maybe social media are talking about. We know that Mikel Arteta still wants to make a move, and the battle will be in agreeing a price, because Milan kind of do still need to sell, and they're not going to get rid of Leao from what I understand. And he's the sort of 100 million player that a few have inquired about and been scared off by the price. I think with Sandro Tonali, the fee could still be somewhere close to 50 million, at least 45 million. And although Arsenal haven't been shy in spending and trying to get more wage space and outgoings resolved, I think that it's going to be tough simply because of the player's age and the price. So this might be one to watch, because again, clubs inquire with multiple windows ahead. When you get the name you want and their box office, it's usually because your club has put in work and effort windows in advance. So Arsenal inquiring might not even be for now, it might be for next summer. But Milan's response to all inquiries, not just Arsenal, has been very clear that if you want to start a conversation, it's 45 to 50 million. And it remains to be seen whether Arsenal are prepared to advance that. Right now, it's an inquiry, but nothing more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought of you when I read that news. It was almost like this has probably been leaked by someone in Italy who has no loyalty to Arsenal. Arsenal probably want to keep this very quiet. It's probably nothing meant to be coming out this summer at all. There's also the other question about Arsenal's bid or pursuit. I think that's the Villarreal wonder kid, I think, isn't it? Pino. Again, does that feel very much? I mean, there's a headline in the Daily Mail saying set to sign him, but is that something they're looking at now as a winger, or is that more one for the future again?
Arsenal fans all summer have been talking about mystery signings, mystery wingers, and the Villarreal player Jeremy Pino is fantastic, by the way. Really, really good player. And I think that this one is one to watch. So, first of all, he has a release clause. And if Arsenal do business below the release clause, they'll have pulled off a fantastic signing. And the release clause is, I believe, over 65 million quid. And the feeling is that any Arsenal interest will be in the mid-30s. So it'll be a fantastic bit of business and ambitious as well. And I've seen the reports that say that there's interest from Arsenal and Liverpool, and that Arsenal are going to have an offer accepted for somewhere in the region of 30 to 35 million. And that, I think, to give them credit, first came from the Spanish outlet AS. And they believe in Spain that a likely bid of half the release clause could be accepted. And that's because Villarreal need the money and they have to sell. So I think that from what I understand, this does actually genuinely have a little bit more substance to it. I made an inquiry 24 hours ago to find out from the player's agent if there was any desire to move, and got quite a coy response. And a lot may just come down, a bit like Sesko as well, to whether a young 19-year-old thinks it's the right time to make a move to Arsenal with a big tag over him, and how often is game time going to be provided. So that's a factor. But unlike some of the other less substance transfers that we've spoken about, the reason why I think Arsenal are a bit more confident in this is because they're moving for the future, as per Marquinhos, but also Villarreal are going to have to find income from somewhere. So I would classify this one as a one to watch, and it could well move quickly. And I think that it does have something to it, at least based upon talking to sources close to the player, and coupled with the fact that, you know, Villarreal are going to have to find money from somewhere for sure before the window closes, and whether or not it's Pino remains to be seen.
Interesting update there. I'm sure there's some gooners in the comment section. Very, very excited indeed. Liverpool fans asking about Matheus Nunes, but I mean, Liverpool updates in general seem to be quite sparse. It's like seeking out unicorns in many ways. But with the injury to Thiago, is there likely to be any Liverpool activity between now and the end of the window, Ben?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? They never say never at Liverpool, but they're very content with their window so far. So I think we may see a swoop based upon injuries only, but they don't buy players for the sake of it. And I know the Liverpool football department pretty well. One or two that I have interacted with and even worked with on a number of occasions. And the two I speak to at quite senior level at Liverpool. And it's funny because when you know somebody at that level and you have the direct dialogue, you try not to always be bugging them with X, Y, and Z. The way that you operate as a journalist to get information is just by being friendly with people. And some of the top journalists out there do exactly that. If you're bugging them every 2 minutes, only in a professional capacity, not a personal capacity, you never make the relationship. And I only bring that up, by the way, because a lot of young journalists reach out to me and they ask for advice. And I say, look, add the names on LinkedIn, find contact details. But when you reach them, if they've never heard of you and you say, what's the latest with De Jong, then you're going to get nothing. So it's all about getting that FaceTime and relationship. And the people I know at Liverpool tell me the same thing every year, that their aim at this stage of the window and in the last week of the window is to turn on Sky Sports News with a Chinese and laugh and wow at all the other news from all the other clubs, a lot of which they knew about in advance, because that's another little known fact in the window, that when Club A signs a player, Club B, if they're doing their job right, probably knew about it and were across it long before us as journalists. So Liverpool are very, very clued up. And I don't think that they are forced in any way by injuries. If a right opportunity comes, then we'll wait and see. Specifically with Matheus Nunes, like Chelsea, the agent on record, not off record, on record, still is classifying links with Premier League clubs as rumour only and says that nothing has reached him at this point. And to reiterate, that is on record, not off record. Sometimes agents do this as games. Sometimes it's a deflection tactic to keep transfers secret. But as a journalist, we've got a responsibility to report our sources when they're off record. But when it's on record, we obviously, like with Laporta, when he gave me that exclusive interview last or 10 days ago, we can just tell you. So the agent of Nunes is saying nothing has yet from any Premier League club landed on his desk. Let's see whether that moves over the coming days and weeks. But that is the situation specifically with Nunes at the moment. Great player. Liverpool would be greedy, wouldn't they, if they end up with two Nuneses in the same window? And I do think it would be an excellent signing if they or any other club can pull it off. Sky high potential, seen a fair amount of him, scores very highly on the scouting report, and one for the future. So one to watch, but like I say, at the moment, on record, the agent has made it clear that no formal offers have reached his desk. And the last thing just to say on Nunes, because there's a lot of confusion, is a lot of people go, oh, you say agent, isn't that Mendes? It actually isn't Mendes. Mendes's agency have got a sort of crossover and sharing partnership with the agency that represents Matheus Nunes. But if anything happens, it won't be directly facilitated by Mendes. It is not inconceivable that he could be involved. But it isn't directly Mendes. That's not the direct representation for this particular player.
That makes sense. I mean, Mendes gets involved. He gets used as an intermediary a lot by a lot of people as well, and clubs that he has relationships with. So he's often involved in things that he's got no direct contact in as well. But there we go. A few comments here. Terry, imagine if Fergie spoke against the Glazers. Yeah, I mean, he could have done. But as I stated earlier on in the tweet, and people are calling me out for this, but I don't care. I've seen a lot of journalists and a lot of media pundits and a lot of fans in the last week suddenly all become Glazer out merchants. I'm not celebrating with any of them. You know, we've been talking about this at Man United for 17 years. We've been talking about it on socials for 9 years. And I'm not suddenly going to start celebrating a Sky Sports presenter that's talking about it now. Or, you know, Gary Lineker will probably jump on the bandwagon next and say, yeah, they've got to go. These are the same very people that called us all ungrateful 12 to 18 months ago when it was fashionable to say that. And suddenly all the main voices, and I don't include myself in this, all the main voices pushing against the Glazers for the last 5 to 9 years on socials and 17 years in total are now being ignored for all these more famous fans or these famous TV sports pundits calling them out. When it shouldn't be. It should be the originators that started these causes against the Glazers that are being given the attention, the airtime, the notoriety for pushing this. Not someone that's going, oh look, it's really fashionable now, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon. So I'm really sorry to say, and I'm not an activist type person, but for me, I don't like Johnny come latelys. I'm a bit like that with music. You know, sometimes there are bands that have been so popular in a certain scene for 10, 15 years. They get one big song that goes in the charts and suddenly everyone becomes a super fan. I'm like, nah, drop me out. Like you weren't here at the beginning. A quick question before. Now, I know you've got to go, actually. Is Ronaldo going to stay? Nothing's changing that as far as I know they're pushing for a move out. But Ben has got to go, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want to make him late. He's covering the Super Cup tonight. People keep saying in the comments, why are you always in hotels? Because the man's got a proper job and he travels around the world covering football. He's living the absolute dream.
Yeah, the hotel changes. It can be my New York hotel. It can be down in London. My flat's in Edinburgh, by the way. So if I'm in London, it's a hotel. If I'm at a game, it's a hotel. During the Euros, it's a hotel. So if you add up all that time, it's basically the entire time since the window's been open. I can live out a hotel, which sounds like a high life. I'm glad in this particular hotel that I'm not footing the bill. That's the only thing that I would say. It's a very nice hotel. And just one thing before I go, I thought it was a good question in the chat. There's so much in the chat that apologies because I might not remember the name, but I think it was from Jar L, who basically just said, when you cover a story as a journalist versus your personal opinion, how much of the personal opinion do you give? And I try largely, unless it's a formative part of a transfer or it's really 50-50, not to give a personal opinion. If I do, I make it very clear it's only my personal opinion. So personal opinion is informed by sources, of course, but you can have a differentiation where you have a personal view and then you have a professional view. And the key really is, you know, if I'm here right now and I think this is how the De Jong transfer is going to end up, of course I can take a personal opinion, but if the narrative has not moved to the point where it's substantiated enough, then I will hold my personal opinion and I will try to just give you the two sides. Because if I come down on a personal opinion and it's not moved enough, then because there's such a blur, because if I give you a personal opinion, some people will construe that as reporting, and then it becomes irresponsible journalism. So if somebody says, do I think it's a good move for Wesley Fofana if he joins Chelsea, then I'll give you a personal opinion as a Leicester fan, having watched the player based on his career. But if someone says, is Wesley Fofana going to move to Chelsea? What is your personal opinion? I will not give you that personal opinion. I will only give you the information I have at the time as a journalist. So when it is allowing for me to tell you whether I think something might work, like when you asked me about Rabiot, is that going to work in the dressing room? Is that going to work in the system? Of course, I can give you a personal opinion. It doesn't hold any weight or value, but that's my personal opinion. But if you say, is Rabiot going to join for sure? What's your personal opinion? I will always say I'm not going to give you a personal opinion because the narrative has not moved to a point where my personal opinion is responsible as a journalist. But what I can do is I can tell you what I'm hearing from sources, which is their opinion collated by a journalist to try and provide you the latest with balance. And that's where I think the line is, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I totally, I thank you very much for that super chat. I totally agree, and I mean, I can tell the difference. I aggregate news, things I see and read. I encourage people to go and put the source on there to go check out their Twitter account. We always share the links. Now we can't put out everything you say in a tweet, but we'll put in like a chunk, and then discussing now live with Ben Jacobs. Go watch the show. But we shared something that was stated by a Dutch journalist earlier on Sky Sports. We quoted him. We quoted the outlet that had shared it, and stated that there was this agreement between Frenkie de Jong and the agent. And people are in the comments saying to me, I can't believe you're still lying to us all, Terry. I'm like, you not read the tweet? I mean, it's not my comment. I've tagged someone else in it. Like so I do get where you're coming from. Sometimes you give an opinion and people go, oh, you said this was going to happen. I'm like, no, that was my theory, or that's what I believe. So no, I totally get that. Ben, always a pleasure to speak to you, my friend. Viewers, you're absolutely amazing. Smash that like button before you leave, though, and subscribe to the Football Terrace. But until next time, take care. Goodbye. God bless. And we'll see